Good morning, everyone. I'll just start with paying homage to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, Aya and I have been approximately once a month or so giving a talk on some impressive Buddhist women. So those of you who attend the monastery live, when you come up into the shrine room on the stairwell, there's all these photographs of some are monastics and some are lay women. And so we've done a couple already, so I'm going to give a talk this morning on Upasika Kee Nanayon. So here's her photo. Sorry, it's a bit, I got reflection here. So Upasika Kee Nanayon, she had the distinction of being the foremost female Dhamma teacher in 20th century Thailand. So that was quite an honor for her. She was born in 1901 to a Chinese merchant family near Bangkok. So they were immigrants to Thailand. Her mother was a practicing Buddhist and taught Kee chanting and the precepts at a very young age. And as a teenager, she devoted all her spare time to reading Dhamma books and meditating while working at a small business to support her father in his old age. So I assume by this time her mother had passed away. And her plan was to save enough money from this job so that she could retire early and devote herself to meditation. She had an aunt and uncle who were also meditators, and they had a small home on a forested hill near the town where Kee lived, and she often went there to practice. And actually, this home of her aunt and uncle was actually an abandoned monastic retreat center that was located on 30 acres of land. So she realized her dream in 1945 at the age of 44, and she was able to retire and moved with her aunt and uncle into this forest home. And the three of them devoted themselves to meditation. And their practice attracted other meditators, and eventually the home expanded to become a women's practice center, which is still active right to this day. And Kee, she became the Dhamma teacher for these women, and she became known as an excellent teacher, and as I said, actually the best known female Dhamma teacher in all of Thailand. So because of her reputation, more and more people came to her center. She died in 1978 at the age of 77. But her sister, Upasika Wan, she took over as leader of the community until her death in 1993. The center, called Khao Suan Luong, is now run by a committee and has 30 residents living there. So that's all I have as a biography of Upasika Kee Nanayon. So I'm going to spend the rest of today, our session today, just talking about her meditation practice, how she taught meditation. So just a brief sort of summary of that. So she first of all encouraged her students to develop some calmness by doing the 4-element meditation. So the 4 elements are earth, water, fire, and wind. So earth is the solid parts of our body, like our muscles and bones. Water are the liquidy things like blood, saliva, tears, lymphatic fluids, and other body fluids. Fire, that refers to our body temperature and to metabolism. And wind would be our breath and other less savory wind elements. So these elements, they're all very unstable. They change with injury or fitness or our age, and we absolutely don't have complete control over them. So it's important for us not to call them me or mine, but to see them just as impersonal, just as aspects of nature. And if we can see our body just as elements, these 4 elements, then it helps us to let go of clinging and attachment to our bodies as some kind of an unchanging self, because the reality is it's very changing. Now, I don't have the 4 elements as one of my meditation practices, but when I put this talk up on our website, I'm going to include 2 brief instructional videos by Beth Upton. So if you're interested in giving a try to the 4-element meditation, then there'll be some instructions there that'll be that'll be linked when I post this. So Upasika Kee was suggesting to her students that they practice the 4 elements until they experience some kind of calm. So the first task is to settle our minds and not to move into the insight practices until some settling has occurred. So if you look at the teachings of different teachers, this is where there's always a little bit of difference in that how much calmness do they encourage. So teachers like Ajahn Brahm, he feels it's important to calm ourselves into the state of jhanas before we start looking at sort of emphasizing insight meditation, because he feels it almost unfolds naturally after we experience the jhana states. And then other teachers like Upasika Kee, they don't encourage students to go all the way into the jhanas. They just encourage them to get some degree of calmness and then to move to an emphasis on insight. But just to make a comment that the Buddha really never made a big distinction between the calming and the insight. He always felt that they were sort of like 2 sides of the same coin, and he called it samatha vipassana, and felt that the 2 were always going together, and they do, but but there can be an emphasis. You know, you can emphasize the samatha or the calming, or you can emphasize the vipassana, the insight. So her method was not to go all the way into the jhana states, but to develop some degree of calm. And then once there was some calm, then she moved to a state. Her second step, I believe, would be nowadays called open awareness, where she just encouraged her students to look inside and just watch all the wanderings of the mind. But being very careful to just be a stand-back witness to this and not go out and latch on or grab on to anything that was arising. So not to get into, like evaluating what was arising by saying, I like this or I don't like this. And not to get caught up in whatever was arising and get yourself into thinking about the past or thinking about the future. Just staying as this impersonal witness, watching whatever was arising. I find that difficult to do, but I know a lot of people do this kind of open awareness, and our teacher Beth Upton sort of sees it as sort of a first step for a lot of people to just practice open awareness. So you can just see how it goes for you. For myself, I kind of like that post in the ground that you tie the wild elephant, i.e. my mind, to. So the post in the ground for me is breath meditation. So I find that much easier to help come to a state of calm. If I'm just practicing open awareness, then instead of being the standing back and witnessing, I get involved in what's arising. And I just, every once in a while, I'll come out and go, I'm thinking this or that. And then I'm back in there totally involved again and not being the witness. But all of our brains work sort of differently. And this open awareness is a practice that a lot of people do. So you can give it a try. So again, as a second step, Upasika Kee is encouraging her students to do this again until you get to sort of a state of equanimity. And then once you have some equanimity, then she wants you to look at what we call the 5 aggregates: our feelings, our feeling tone, our perceptions, our thoughts, our consciousness, sensations in the physical body, to notice as they arise, notice as they persist, and then notice when they end. And again, just standing back as a neutral witness, not getting involved with these things. Just noticing, this has come into awareness now. It's still here, and then, now it's ended. And she felt it was really important to focus especially on the ending, as she felt that this would lead to insight into anatta, not self. And again, what not self refers to is not that we don't exist. Like if I pinch myself, I'm going to ouch. So it's not that we don't exist. What not self is referring to is there's not a fixed, unchanging aspect to ourselves. Ourselves are processes that are just flowing, changing all the time. So that's what's meant by anatta, or not self. And she felt looking at this, especially looking at the ending of anything that arises, that would help us to gain insight into not being some kind of a solid, fixed entity. Now, we experience ourselves in 5 different ways. These are known as the 5 aggregates. So the first way we experience ourselves is through our physical body, through our sensations. The second is called Vedana, and that's an emotional tone. So it's something more primitive than more elaborated emotions. It's the emotional tone that happens with every single sensory experience, and it happens instantly. So when we get a physical sensation, we experience that as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So that's what we mean by Vedana, or emotional tone. So we have a physical sensation, and it's as soon as we are aware of that sensation, there's also an awareness of whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Perception. This is putting a label onto a sensation. So instead of just hearing, we'll say dog barking, or radio playing, or person speaking. So that's our perception, is we're able to put a specific label on some sensory experience. And the same thing with seeing. Instead of just it being color and shape, it's like, oh, it's a tree, or it's a book, or it's a dog. So that's perception. And then, of course, we have our thoughts and all the various things that arise in our mind. And of course, what's really important is intention. This is how we create our karma, is what is our intention? Is it a harmful intention, or is it a non-harming intention? So that's an important part of our thinking mind. And then the last aggregate is consciousness, which is totally connected with all the other aggregates. You can't really separate it out. It's just an awareness that something's happening, and then the other aggregates are more specific. Now, even though we practice meditation, we're not going to stop suffering from arising with each of these aggregates. Like sometimes our bodily feelings will be pleasant, but other times we'll have pain arising. Our Vedana, sometimes it's pleasant or neutral, but other times it's unpleasant. It's an unpleasant feeling tone. Perception, what we perceive. We can perceive things as like a beautiful sunset, or we can perceive very distressing loud sounds, or other things. So perceptions can be pleasant, or they can be suffering. Same thing with our thoughts in our mind. We can have thoughts that arise that are very comforting or pleasant, and then other ones that are very disturbing to us. So our meditation practice does not take away the suffering that can arise in these 5 aggregates. But again, it's important, because we're not in control of these, that we then don't take it personally. If it was ours, we should have control over it, but we don't. So we just want to see it as part of nature, and just see it as suffering has arisen, rather than, oh, I'm suffering. We want to get away from the I, like I'm having this experience, but oh, due to causes and conditions, this suffering has arisen. This helps us sort of stand back from it to a certain degree. And then helps us not to do the second arrow, stabbing ourselves with that second arrow. one of the ways that we can help ourselves not to sort of grab onto things when they arise, like we're wanting to be this sort of impersonal witness that's kind of standing back. And so one way not to help us not to grab onto these things and personalize them that have arisen is to experience or think about their drawbacks. So just consider how when you get lost in your mind and you're personalizing some suffering that has arisen, and you're just rehashing in your mind, like, how could this have happened, or how could they have said this, or this is so terrible, or I can't stand this, or when's it ever going to end, this is horrible. So just realize how much suffering you're creating for yourself when you're doing that sort of rehashing of whatever has arisen in your mind. And if you can really feel that suffering, that's like feeling the hot coal in your hand, and then you don't have to talk yourself out of letting it go. You just feel that hot coal and you let it go. So if you can really feel how much suffering you're creating for yourself, then it's easy to just instantaneously drop it. Another way to look at drawbacks is if you're wanting to spend some money on something, another object or a holiday or whatever, be looking at, am I going to put myself into debt? Like, am I going to have enough money for groceries for the rest of the month or whatever? So looking at that as a drawback. Or how many times have you bought something and then you've lost interest in it after a few weeks or a month, and then it's just gathering dust in a closet. So that's definitely a drawback if it's just a temporary sort of craving that is just, it's just going to be more junk collecting in your basement or in your closet. And another drawback is maintenance. Sometimes we buy things that require a fair amount of maintenance, and do we want to be giving that time? I remember one thing I got interested in a couple of years ago was growing mushrooms. So I thought this would be cool, and so I constructed all the equipment and started growing mushrooms. But they take a certain amount of maintenance, and maybe it wasn't a lot, but when I was adding it to the maintenance of all these other things that I had in my life, then it was adding up to quite a bit. So I gave my mushroom growing operation away. Okay, now before I go on to what Upasika Kee had to say next, I just want to sort of back up and talk about people who come, those of us who come and are attracted to the teachings of the Buddha, we sort of fall into sort of two kinds of groups. Sort of one group is those of us who aren't interested yet in giving up the sensory world. We're still interested in, going to art shows or music concerts or going on holidays or, whatever. We're still, the sensory world still has a real draw for us, and we still want to participate in it and get what pleasure we can out of the sensory world. And we're using the teachings of the Buddha just to help ourselves to suffer less. And then we have a group of people who have sort of a deeper insight into the suffering that's inherent in samsara and these realms of existence. And they want to let go of the sensory world and just really devote themselves to their spiritual practice so that they can come to awakening and not have to experience rebirth into this realm or the other realms of existence. And then, of course, there's going to be a blurry stage in between of people who have one foot in the sensory world and one foot into the more deeper meditation practice. So if Bhikkhu Thanissaro wrote a book about Upasika Kee called The Unentangled Knowing, and I don't really recommend this book for people who are solidly into group one, because she's quite the stern taskmaster. But if you're definitely into group two, then she's going to be very inspiring and helpful to you. Anyway, so just keeping this in mind for when I read this next statement about her teaching. So she said that we're not practicing simply for the ease and pleasure that comes when the mind is still. She's saying we have to observe and evaluate things so as to see them clearly in a way that allows us to let them go. And we let things go through seeing their impermanence, their suffering, their not self nature. And she also talks about how the deeper sila is our morality, our practice of the precepts, practice of non-harming. So deeper sila goes beyond the 5 precepts. It's referring to not saying, doing, or thinking anything based on desire, aversion, or delusion. So you see, she's quite strong in her teachings. Another aspect of her teaching is that she encourages her students to sit through pain. This isn't taught so much anymore. I know when I started meditating over 30 years ago, all of my teachers taught us this way. They encouraged us to get ourselves into our sitting posture and then not to move. Regardless of what kind of pain started arising, you just sit there. And, for my day-to-day practice when I was working, it was a 40-minute practice, so I wouldn't get into any pain in 40 minutes. But when I would go to retreats and I'd be sitting for 2 or 3 hours at a time, I'd get into pretty significant physical pain from my sitting posture, sitting that long. But I'd follow the instructions and I'd sit there and I wouldn't move, and I'd be sweating away in this horrible pain. But after an hour or maybe 2 hours, it would miraculously go away. But what I found was that when I'd be on these retreats, that I started getting very reluctant to sit down and meditate, because I knew that I was going to push myself to sit through like 1 or 2 hours of pain, and I didn't want to sit through 1 or 2 hours of pain. So I went to talk to Ajahn Sona about this, and he just said, no more pain. He said, at home, meditate in your lazy boy. So, and I've certainly noticed in the past 30 years that the teachers have changed. They've changed from saying sit through pain to saying, make adjustments, have your body comfortable. And a couple of monastics who are about my age, Ajahn Viradamo and Ajahn Pasano, I've heard them in talks saying now, as they've aged, that the majority of their meditation is lying down meditation, which is true for me too. When I go on retreats, I do a lot of my meditation lying down, because that's more comfortable for my aging body. And I do know a few monastics who have totally wrecked knees from sitting through pain. So I think it makes sense if you have some kind of chronic pain and you've done whatever you can, you've adjusted your posture, you've taken medication, you've done whatever, but this pain is with you. Well, then in that case, well, of course we have to just sit with it because it's there. we can't just do a postural adjustment and it goes away. So in that case, then yes, we need to just sit with it. And there's various skillful ways that we can sit with pain, and maybe in the discussion period, if this is of interest to people, we can talk about some of those skillful ways to be with pain. But if it's pain that we can release by a postural adjustment, then I think most teachers are encouraging us to do that nowadays. Upasika Kee said that a very important aspect of daily life is to keep the precepts. So, yes, I mean, this is definitely the teaching of the Buddha, that the baseline for our meditation practice is non-harming. And Upasika Kee, like Deepa Ma, she stressed the importance of continuous mindfulness throughout the day with all that we do every moment. So our teacher, Beth Upton, she also teaches this, but the difference is that Upasika Kee is saying, just be mindful of what it is that you're doing at the moment, whereas Beth Upton, her encouragement is, if what you're doing doesn't require brain power, if it's more of an automatic activity or you're not having to think very much, then try and be aware of your meditation object. Like if your meditation object is your breath, then when you're cooking a meal or sweeping the floor, or walking somewhere, then have your breath in your awareness. So because this makes it so much easier than when it's your time to do your dedicated meditation practice and you're sitting down to be with your breath, well, you've already been with it a large part of your day, and so then it allows you just more quickly, more rapidly to drop into your meditation practice. But of course, when you're having to, engage your mind in some delicate activity, or you're in conversation with somebody, well, then your major focus then is going to be on what's arising in the moment. But otherwise, try and be with your meditation object. So again, two different sort of aspects of the teaching. Okay. That's all I have to say about Upasika Kee Nanayon.
Dhamma Kataya Karandrase Sad 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 Anudami